What happens when Hollywood's most beloved action hero meets late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Sylvester Stallone sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. This wasn't just another celebrity chat gone wrong. This was a complete meltdown that left audiences stunned and social media in absolute chaos. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in the most explosive late-night television moment in recent memory. The tension was palpable from the moment Stallone walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel live stage. What started as typical Hollywood banter quickly spiraled into something much darker, and by the end of the night, one of cinema's greatest legends would storm off set, leaving Kimmel and his audience in complete shock. The evening began innocuously. Enough. Stallone, promoting his latest project, settled into the guest chair with his characteristic charm and that unmistakable Philadelphia grit that made him a household name. The audience erupted in applause as Kimmel launched into his opening remarks, but something felt different. Those who know Kimmel's interviewing style could sense an edge in his voice, a sharpness that suggested this wouldn't be the typical softball interview celebrity guests usually expect. "So, Sly," Kimmel began, leaning back in his chair with that smirk that's become his trademark, "you've been making movies for what, 50 years now? That's a long time to be playing the same character over and over again." The comment landed with an uncomfortable thud. Stallone's smile faltered for just a moment, but he recovered quickly, chuckling and shaking his head. "Well, Jimmy, I think you're confusing longevity with repetition," Stallone replied, his voice carrying that familiar rasp, but with an undertone of warning. "Rocky, Rambo, these aren't just characters. They're cultural icons that have inspired generations. But I suppose when you're reading jokes off cue cards every night, it might be hard to understand what real creativity looks like." The audience let out a collective gasp. This wasn't the playful ribbing they were used to seeing on late-night television. Kimmel's expression hardened, and for a moment the studio fell silent except for the uncomfortable shuffling of the audience. Kimmel leaned forward, his voice dropping to that condescending tone he reserves for political segments. "Oh, I see. So writing and performing comedy 5 nights a week for millions of viewers is somehow less creative than, what, grunting through another sequel? Tell me, Sly, how many times can you say Adrian before it gets old?" Stallone's jaw tightened visibly. The cameras captured every micro-expression as the legendary actor processed what was happening. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was an ambush. "You know what, Jimmy? I've been in this business long enough to recognize a bully when I see one. You think hiding behind that desk and your writers gives you the right to disrespect someone who's been entertaining people since before you were relevant?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Kimmel's fake smile never wavered, but his eyes revealed something darker. "Bully? That's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of glorifying violence. I'm just asking the questions our viewers want answered. Like, when was the last time you made a movie that didn't involve you punching something?" Stallone stood up slightly in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests. "Listen here, you smug little—" He caught himself, took a deep breath, and settled back down. "You want to talk about my career? Fine. But let's talk about yours too. How does it feel knowing that your biggest achievement is making fun of people who've actually accomplished something with their lives?" The audience was transfixed. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was personal. Kimmel's facade was beginning to crack, and those watching could sense that something explosive was building. The host's usual composure was slipping, replaced by something uglier, more vindictive. "Accomplished something?" Kimmel's voice rose slightly, his famous chuckle taking on a bitter edge. "You mean like getting knocked out by a nobody in Philadelphia and turning it into a 40-year career? Or maybe you're talking about your Oscar nominations. Oh wait, that's right. You didn't win any of those, did you?" The low blow hit its mark. Stallone's face flushed, and his voice when he spoke was barely controlled. "You know what your problem is, Jimmy. You've spent so long hiding behind your writers and your teleprompter that you've forgotten how to have a real conversation. Everything's a setup. Everything's a punchline. You can't just talk to another human being without trying to humiliate them for your audience's entertainment." Kimmel's mask was fully off now. The genial host persona had evaporated, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Humiliate? I'm just doing my job. If you can't handle a few simple questions about your career, maybe you shouldn't be doing press tours." "This is how interviews work, Sly. I ask questions. You answer them. I don't need to kiss your ass just because you're famous." The studio audience was completely silent now, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Stallone's hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from barely contained rage. "Simple questions? You call attacking someone's life work and mocking their achievements simple questions? This isn't journalism, Jimmy. This is character. Assassination disguised as entertainment." Kimmel leaned back, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. "Character assassination? Wow, that's dramatic. I'm just pointing out some facts about your career. Maybe if you'd spent more time working on your craft instead of working on your image, you'd have something more substantial to talk about." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Stallone's eyes narrowed, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "You want to talk about craft? Let's talk about yours. How many writers does it take to come up with your material? How many producers have to approve every word that comes out of your mouth? You're not a comedian, Jimmy. You're a puppet with better suits." The insult struck home. Kimmel's face reddened, and for the first time in the interview, he seemed genuinely rattled. "At least I don't need to rely on the same 3 facial expressions to carry a 2-hour movie. At least when I fail, I don't blame it on the audience not understanding my vision." Stallone rose from his chair, his imposing frame casting a shadow over Kimmel's desk. The host instinctively leaned back, suddenly realizing he might have pushed too far. The audience held its collective breath as Stallone placed both hands on the desk and leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think you're clever, don't you? Sitting there in your safe little studio, protected by your security and your cameras, thinking you can say whatever you want without consequences. But here's the thing, Jimmy. Respect isn't something you can script. And right now, you're showing everyone exactly what kind of person you really are." The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could feel it. This wasn't just 2 celebrities having a disagreement. This was about to become something much more serious, and the cameras were capturing every explosive second. Kimmel's nervous laughter filled the uncomfortable silence as he tried to regain control of the situation. "Wow. Okay, Rocky's getting a little heated here, folks," he said, addressing the audience with forced casualness. "Maybe we should talk about something else. How about your workout routine? I bet our viewers would love to know how a 77-year-old still manages to look so muscular." The condescending tone was unmistakable. Stallone straightened up, his eyes blazing with fury. "Are you seriously going to sit there and mock my age now, after everything else you've said tonight? What's next, Jimmy? Going to make fun of my speech impediment? My family? Where exactly does your cruelty end?" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This had gone far beyond typical late-night television banter. Kimmel, however, seemed emboldened by Stallone's emotional response. "Cruelty? Come on, Sly, this is comedy. If you can't laugh at yourself, what's the point? I mean, your movies have been making people laugh for decades. Just maybe not in the way you intended." The studio fell deadly quiet. Even the band members looked uncomfortable, exchanging worried glances. Stallone's fists clenched at his sides, and his voice when he spoke was filled with decades of suppressed frustration. "You know what, Jimmy? I've sat through a lot of interviews over the years. I've dealt with tough questions, hostile journalists, people who wanted to tear me down. But I've never encountered someone as fundamentally lacking in basic human decency as you are right now. Kimmel's expression hardened. The pretense of humor was completely gone now, replaced by something genuinely ugly. Lacking in decency? That's interesting coming from someone who spent his entire career promoting toxic masculinity and violence. How many kids have tried to solve their problems with their fists because they watched your movies? How much damage have you done to society? With your entertainment? The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Stallone's face went white, then red with rage. You want to talk about damage to society? Let's talk about what you do every night. You sit behind that desk and you tear people apart for laughs. You mock, you belittle, you destroy people's reputations for entertainment. You're not a comedian, Jimmy. You're a parasite. The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row looked genuinely shocked. Kimmel's jaw dropped, but he recovered quickly, his voice rising with anger. A parasite? That's what you think of comedy? Of entertainment? At least I'm not peddling outdated masculinity fantasies to impressionable audiences. At least my work doesn't end with someone getting their face beaten in. Stallone stepped closer to the desk, his imposing presence making Kimmel visibly nervous. My movies give people hope. They show that underdogs can overcome impossible odds. Rocky wasn't about violence. It was about heart, about never giving up. But you wouldn't understand that because you've never struggled for anything in your life. Everything's been handed to you. Kimmel's voice cracked slightly as he responded, his composure finally beginning to completely unravel. Handed to me? Are you kidding? Do you have any idea how hard it is to make it in comedy? How many years I spent doing radio, working clubs, getting rejected? At least when you got your break, you stayed relevant. Some of us have to reinvent ourselves constantly. Reinvent yourself? Stallone's voice was incredulous. Is that what you call this? This isn't reinvention, Jimmy. This is desperation. You're so terrified of becoming irrelevant that you'll attack anyone who comes on your show just to create viral moments. You've turned cruelty into content. The words struck deep. Kimmel's face flushed red, and when he spoke, his voice was shaking with rage. Cruelty into content? That's rich coming from Mr. I'm gonna punch my way to the top. You want to talk about desperation? How about making 6 Rocky movies? How about Rambo sequels nobody asked for? How about clinging to characters you created 40 years ago because you can't come up with anything new? Stallone slammed his hand down on the desk so hard that Kimmel's coffee mug jumped. Those characters mean something to people. They inspire hope, determination, the belief that anyone can overcome their circumstances. What do you inspire, Jimmy? What legacy are you leaving behind besides a collection of mean-spirited clips? The studio was electric with tension. Camera. Operators were getting closer, sensing they were capturing television history. Kimmel, clearly rattled by Stallone's physical display, tried to reassert control. Legacy? My legacy is 20 years of making people laugh, of bringing joy into their lives 5 nights a week. Your legacy is teaching people that violence solves problems. Violence solves problems? Stallone's voice rose to near shouting levels. You think that's what my movies are about? You clearly haven't watched them, have you? You've just absorbed whatever shallow interpretation fits your narrative. Rocky loses his first fight, Jimmy. The message isn't about winning through violence. It's about having the courage to go the distance. Kimmel's laugh was bitter and forced. Oh, please spare me the film school analysis. You punch things, people cheer, you make money. It's not Shakespeare, Sly. Stop trying to pretend your action movies are some kind of profound art. The dismissal was the final straw. Stallone's entire body tensed, and his voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You know what your problem is? You've spent so much time hiding behind jokes and sarcasm that you've forgotten how to recognize genuine emotion, genuine storytelling. You see everything through this cynical lens because that's all you understand. You can't create, so you destroy. Kimmel stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backwards. Create? I create comedy every single night. I create moments that bring people together, make them laugh, help them forget their problems for a few minutes. What you create is fantasy violence for people who can't handle real life. Fantasy violence? Stallone moved around the desk, and suddenly the dynamic completely shifted. Kimmel backed away, his bravado evaporating as he realized the 77-year-old actor was still incredibly intimidating in person. You want to see real violence? Keep pushing me, Jimmy. Keep disrespecting everything I've worked for, everything I believe in. The threat was unmistakable. Security guards began moving closer to the stage area and the audience was completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something that had crossed the line from entertainment into something genuinely dangerous. Kimmel, now clearly frightened but trying to hide it, held up his hands in a gesture that was part surrender, part mockery. Oh, now we're getting to the real Stallone, aren't we? When words don't work, threaten violence. How perfectly on brand. For you. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't handle criticism, you can't handle honest questions, so you resort to intimidation. Stallone's eyes blazed with fury, and the entire studio held its breath, wondering if they were about to witness something that would end both men's careers. For a moment that felt like an eternity, the two men stood facing each other in complete silence. The tension was so thick it was suffocating. Security guards had positioned themselves strategically around the stage, ready to intervene if necessary. The audience sat frozen, phones recording every second of what was clearly television history in the making. Then something shifted in Stallone's expression. The rage was still there, burning bright, but it was joined by something else. Disappointment, sadness, and a weary recognition of what this moment represented. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, but somehow more devastating than if he had shouted. You know what, Jimmy? I almost fell for it. For just a second there, you had me ready to become exactly what you've been trying to paint me as all night. Some violent brute who solves problems with his fists. That would have been perfect for you, wouldn't it? Get the old boxer to throw a punch on live television. Create your viral moment. Prove your point about toxic masculinity. Kimmel's face went pale. He opened his mouth to respond, but Stallone held up a hand to silence him. But here's the thing, I'm not that person. I never was. Rocky Balboa wasn't about violence, he was about dignity, about maintaining your humanity, even when others try to strip it away from you. And right now, you're trying to strip away mine. The actor took a step back, creating distance between them, and his voice grew stronger, more commanding. I've been in this business for 50 years, Jimmy. I've faced critics, haters, people who wanted to see me fail, but I've never encountered someone who seemed to take such genuine pleasure in trying to humiliate another human being. What happened to you? When did entertainment become synonymous with cruelty? Kimmel tried to regain his composure, straightening his tie and attempting his trademark smirk. Come on, Sly, you're being overly dramatic. This is just how interviews work in today's media landscape. People want authenticity. They want real moments, not scripted promotion. Authenticity. Stallone's laugh was bitter. There's nothing authentic about what you've done here tonight. This was calculated, deliberate character assassination disguised as comedy. You invited me here under false pretenses, then spent the entire interview trying to tear down everything I've worked for. The audience began to murmur among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Some people were shaking their heads in disapproval. Others were recording with their phones, sensing they were watching something that would be analyzed and discussed for years to come. Kimmel, sensing he was losing control of the narrative, tried one last desperate gambit. Look, if you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you shouldn't be doing publicity tours. This is television, not a therapy session. I'm not here to make you feel good about yourself. Stallone's response was swift and devastating. Tough questions? You think what you've done here tonight constitutes journalism? You haven't asked me about my new project, my creative process, my experiences in Hollywood, or anything that might actually interest your viewers. Instead, you've spent 30 minutes trying to humiliate me for your own entertainment. He gestured to the audience, his voice rising with passion. These people came here expecting to be entertained, to maybe learn something, to connect with someone whose work has meant something to them. Instead, you've subjected them to a public execution disguised as comedy. How do you think they feel right now? Several audience members nodded in agreement, and a few could be heard voicing their disapproval of Kimmel's behavior. The host's face reddened as he realized he was losing the room. You want to know what's really pathetic, Jimmy? Stallone continued, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. You had an opportunity tonight to have a real conversation with someone who's lived an extraordinary life, who's overcome incredible obstacles, who's inspired millions of people around the world. Instead, you chose to use that opportunity to try to destroy me for clicks and ratings. Kimmel's mask finally slipped completely. Gone was any pretense of humor or entertainment value. What remained was raw, ugly defensiveness. Destroy you? Please, your career was already over. Nobody under 40 cares about Rocky or Rambo anymore. I was doing you a favor by having you on the show at all. The words hit the studio like a physical blow. The audience gasped audibly, and several people could be heard expressing their shock and disapproval. Stallone, however, remained calm, though his eyes flashed with controlled fury. And there it is, he said quietly. The truth finally comes out. You don't see me as a guest, as a fellow entertainer, as a human being worthy of basic respect. You see me as a has-been, a relic you can mock and dismiss for your audience's amusement. He turned to face the audience directly, speaking to them as if Kimmel wasn't even there. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to remember this moment. Remember what you've witnessed here tonight. This is what happens when entertainment becomes more important than humanity. When getting a reaction becomes more valuable than treating people with dignity. Turning back to Kimmel, Stallone's voice was steady but filled with disappointment. I've been knocked down more times than I can count, Jimmy. In the ring, in my career, in my personal life. But I've always gotten back up because I believed in something bigger than myself. I believed in the power of stories to inspire, to give hope, to show people that they can overcome their circumstances. He gestured around the studio with disgust. But this isn't storytelling. This isn't entertainment. This is just cruelty for profit. And I won't be a part of it. Kimmel, desperate to salvage something from the wreckage, tried one final attack. So what? You're just going to walk away? Run back to your mansion and count your money? Some tough guy you turned out to be. Stallone paused at the edge of the stage, his hand on the curtain that led backstage. When he turned back, his expression was one of profound sadness rather than anger. You know what real toughness is, Jimmy? It's knowing when to walk away. It's refusing to let someone else's bitterness and cruelty turn you into something you're not. It's maintaining your dignity even when others are trying to strip it away. He looked directly into the camera, speaking to the millions of viewers watching at home. To everyone watching this, I want you to know that I came here tonight hoping to share some stories, maybe make you laugh, possibly inspire you the way so many of you have inspired me over the years. Instead, you've witnessed something I hope you never have to see again. Entertainment at its absolute worst. The studio was completely silent now except for the sound of Stallone's footsteps as he moved toward the exit. But he stopped one final time, turning back to address Kimmel directly. I genuinely feel sorry for you, Jimmy. You had a platform, a voice, an opportunity to bring joy and laughter into people's lives. Instead, you've chosen to use it as a weapon. That's not comedy. That's just sad. Without another word, Sylvester. Stallone walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a stunned silence that spoke volumes. The cameras continued rolling, capturing Kimmel's shocked expression, the uncomfortable shuffling of the audience, and the general sense that something fundamental had just broken. As the curtain fell behind Stallone, the studio remained eerily quiet. Kimmel, for once in his career, seemed genuinely speechless. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. This wasn't entertainment. It was a masterclass in dignity under fire, delivered by a man who had refused to be broken by someone else's cruelty. The confrontation was over, but its impact would be felt for years to come. In walking away with his head held high, Stallone had delivered the most devastating blow of all. He had revealed the true character of both men, and the contrast couldn't have been more stark.